I'm building this Australian Swagman themed game, which is essentially a sort of crossover between a walking simulator, cozy game, and survival game. And recently I've been spending a lot of time on getting the terrain and ocean looking and feeling the way I want. We covered the ocean and tide system last time, and overall I think things are looking pretty good, but they weren't quite feeling good yet. What I have now is helping to create a visual experience in the player's mind, but what I really want is to create a more fully immersive sensory experience. I want the player to subconsciously be prompted into thinking about how the wind would feel, the chill of the air, the wetness of the water, and even the smell of the scene. This is one of the things I most enjoy about Studio Ghibli movies. Everything has such an enhanced sensory quality to it. Specific examples that spring to mind are Kiki's clothes rippling in the wind in Kiki's delivery service, the storm in Ponyo, and also the cooking scenes in Ponyo. Of course, these effects aren't limited to this small set of examples. It's present in basically the entirety of Studio Ghibli's work. And I wanted to try to capture some of that feeling for my game. So for this video, let's just jump straight to the end result rather than going step by step. We can have a bit of a wonder and sort of a bushcraft ASMR session as I demonstrate a bunch of the changes I've made to try and capture that feeling. The biggest and most notable change is the new weather system, and I've artificially sped up the weather system so that the weather will change much more often than it usually would, so that we can see some of the different weather types as we talk about things. But broadly, there is sunny and nice weather, dreary and overcast, light rain, sun showers, fog, heavy rain, storms, and lightning. So we have rain, of course, which is one of my favorite things in games. I put a lot of effort into making it visually interesting. We have this general rain effect, but also there is splatters of rain on the ground that will change based on the terrain. Rain that falls on the sand will sort of create these little splotches that absorb into the sand. On rocks and up in the tree areas, we'll see more splattering. And in the ocean, we will see the rain particles sort of splashing in the water. We have the audio aspect of the rain as well. I've been capturing all of the audio for the game with this field recording microphone, and I did the same thing here for the rain. I have a few different recordings of different intensities of rain and on different surfaces that I've used, and some I've mixed together. The recordings aren't perfect, but they are decent enough for now. And I'll continue to capture better sounds as I have more opportunities to in the bush, and also as I get better at capturing sounds in general. But what I felt I really needed to paint more of a full sensory picture was to, in a sense, make the rain feel wet. I've made it so that as the player stands out in the rain, they will become wet, which you can see visually. This also happens as you enter the water. So there is this visual suggestion of the consequence of the rain and ocean making the player wet, which I think helps you imagine the sensation of you yourself getting wet in the rain. And then this will also have gameplay consequences eventually too that will add to the immersion, like having to dry yourself off next to a fire. Being wet may be a bonus to the player in hot weather, or it may be detrimental to the player in cold weather or at nighttime. Now, before we move on to what was the most challenging aspect of this batch of work, let's quickly cover some of the other small changes. In good weather, we have these sort of pollen particles that fly around, which I think adds a bit more liveliness and movement to scenes where it's not raining. I've added footprints to the sand, which I think also helps contribute to the aliveness of the scene, but it's also kind of just fun making shapes in the sand. There are also lightning effects and thunderstorm audio for the storm weather types, and fog as well, which is added in heavy rain to decrease visibility, but it's also just its own weather variant as well. And we also have a light for nighttime now. But what I spent more time on than anything else by a long shot was trying to create wind. The feeling of the wind is one of the things I think Studio Ghibli pulls off really well, and whilst I didn't expect to achieve that level of quality, I wanted something that at least made it feel like there really was this wind in the scene, as if it's its own sort of entity, not just having some wiggling tree sprites. But I ran into a bit of a conundrum. I could create more realistic wind effects with shaders that I could apply to individual tree sprites, but it would kill performance as there were just too many trees with too many shaders. And any of the tricks I could come up with to try to create a wind effect on the trees in a single shader pass, although quite performant, just ended up looking bad. I basically just resigned myself to just having to create wind animation sprites for all the different tree sprites manually, which would take a long time, but at least I could get the quality I wanted. But then I realized this would just slow things down too much. An individual tree would be such a huge investment in time, and it would be hard for me to justify working on this sort of early prototype interim art. I didn't want to spend hours on individual trees that I'm likely going to throw away. I didn't want to just have placeholder art throughout development, and I'd also be losing a lot of the dynamic quality of the wind, as I'd need to manually and painstakingly create animation variants for different wind intensities. So I felt stuck, and it felt like one of those things that if I couldn't solve it, it would just kill my motivation for working on the game, not knowing if I'd ever be able to figure out what was really one of the key elements of the game or not. But then I realized I could have the best of both worlds. In fact, I'd done a similar thing in the past. In the old version of this game, I had a shader effect for the shoreline of the ocean, but what I actually did was essentially just record the shader effect and convert it into an animation. This way I get the performance benefit of having a baked-in animation, but also the visual effects and adaptability of shaders. It still would have been quite a bit of annoying work to run the shader effects on individual sprites and convert them into animations, but it was a viable approach. But then I thought on a whim, maybe I could just use AI to create a tool to do it for me. It seemed the kind of thing that AI is pretty good at. And it basically just created this epic tool for me in a single prompt. No back and forth debugging or anything, it just worked right away. It's probably the best result I've ever had from an LLM. Now I can just upload my sprite, paste the shader effect I want to apply. I can see what the effect looks like, and I can even play with these sliders to adjust it to my liking. And then it will export the whole thing as a sprite sheet for me. I import that into a sprite, tweak things to my liking, and then I can add it to my game. The end result is still a bit rudimentary at the moment. Currently it is only the trees affected by wind, and the wind during storms looks a bit silly, but I can easily iterate on this now. I don't care so much about getting it 100% perfect right now, I just want the approach to be viable. Now I feel happy and motivated to move on to other things, rather than feeling like I was just sweeping an enormous monster of a problem under the rug. I tend to find that the best way for me to maintain motivation to work on projects is to deal with these ugly monster problems sooner rather than later. And in exciting news, for me at least, my game has a Steam page now, and an official title, Once Upon a Swagman. Setting up the Steam page was another one of those ugly monster problems that was lingering, so I'm glad to have that dealt with. And hopefully I've convinced you to waltz over to the Steam page and give it a wishlist. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you back here for the next video.